There then I saw Minos, glorious son of Zeus, wielding a golden sceptre, giving sentence from his throne to the dead, while they sat and stood around the prince, asking his dooms through the wide-gated house of Hades. After him I marked the mighty Orion driving the wild beasts together over the mead of asphodel, the very beasts that himself had slain on the lonely hills, with a strong mace all of bronze in his hands, that is ever unbroken. And I saw Tityos, son of renowned earth, lying on a leveled ground, and he covered 9 roods as he lay, and vultures twain beset him, one on either side, and gnawed at his liver, piercing even to the caul. But he drave them not away with his hands, for he had dwelt violently with Leto, the famous bedfellow of Zeus, as she went up to Pytho through the fair lawns of Panopeus. Moreover, I beheld Tantalus in grievous torment, standing in a mirror, and the water came nigh unto his chin. And he stood straining as one athirst, but he might not attain to the water to drink of it, for often as that old man stooped down in his eagerness to drink, so often the water was swallowed up and it vanished away, and the black earth still showed at his feet, for some god parched it evermore. And tall trees flowering shed their fruit overhead, pears and pomegranates and apple trees with bright fruit, and sweet figs and olives in their bloom, whereat, when that old man reached out his hands to clutch them, the wind would toss them to the shadowy clouds. Yea, and I beheld Sisyphus, in strong torment, grasping a monstrous stone with both his hands. He was pressing thereat with his hands and feet, and trying to roll the stone upward toward the brow of the hill, but oft as he was to hurl it over the top, the weight would drive him back, so once again to the plain rolled the stone, a shameless thing. And he once more kept heaving and straining, and the sweat the while was pouring down his limbs, and the dust rose upwards from his head. I like these passages that really give an easy cinematic vision to them. We've been with Odysseus talking to specific shades this entire time, and now it just kind of can zoom back a bit and witness Odysseus looking at this Boschian hellscape of all the different figures that are in the underworld at this time. Just to quickly touch base on everyone we're seeing here, there's Minos, former king, who appears pretty prominently in Theseus's story, Minos being the king of the labyrinth, well, the city that has the labyrinth, and the Minotaur that Theseus fights. Orion appears here, a figure that oddly is known more for the constellation in the sky than I think his actual myth is. But he was a great hunter who carried a big bronze club, who killed beasts with it. Tityos, which is a figure that I think, at least for me, I don't want to speak for everyone, but for me is one of the quintessential images of Greek mythology, particularly the parables and the moral tales. The image of a man tied to a rock with the birds pecking at his guts, so to speak. That's always been an image that has stayed with me, but never remember his name. Tityos, a large, almost superhuman man, who now can't, in hell, in his punishment in Hades, cannot even repel 2 birds from violating him in a kind of reverse punishment for the crime he committed. There's Tantalus, another one that you hear a lot about, the man who in the underworld cannot drink or eat, yet both taunt him. Water reaches his chin, yet he can't ever sip. If he does, it evaporates. Food hanging just above his head, and he can't sup. But when he does, it turns to dust. And then, of course, Sisyphus. Maybe the best known aphorism. That's not the right word. The best known myth, and probably still most referenced myth, the Sisyphusian feat, pushing a rock up a hill only to have it roll back down and continuing that forever and ever. I think anyone who has ever worked a corporate or office job has referenced Sisyphus at some point in their life, even if they didn't recognize that they were. But one thing I want to bring up here is something I find kind of interesting. And I'm not going to be able to speak from authority on this, but Homer is one of the very earliest Greek myths that we have. And I find it fascinating that this chapter, in meeting Achilles, in seeing Minos, in seeing Tantalus and Tityos and Sisyphus, etc., Homer's acknowledging a place in time that the Odyssey is happening, because all of these characters are being presented, A, as if their story has already reached the conclusion, and B, that they're well known. If they weren't well known, Odysseus wouldn't be including him in his story to Alcinous, nor would Homer be including it in the Odyssey. And so I was just very curious about this kind of historical depth and genealogy that the Odyssey kind of creates by happenstance, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. So I did a little bit of research, and I'm just going to kind of go through some of the bullet points with you to try to get a better understanding of how chronology worked uh, in these ancient texts. We've talked a little bit about the heroic age that's taking place after the time of the gods. So already there's a kind of understood progression of epochs. And I'm also currently rereading Edith Hamilton's Greek mythology. And she makes an interesting point in that, saying that before there was kind of a collective way of organizing these stories, um, every little collection of people, whether it's a hamlet, whether it's just roaming people, if they've settled down, just hundreds and thousands of people with their own deities. And often they would write these stories, create these stories with the intention of trying to explain the natural world around them. As civilization kind of spread throughout the world, these figures like Zeus would accumulate the localized deities that they supplanted. So that is why you start to see an expansion of powers attributed to certain gods. Why is Poseidon the god of the sea, but also like loves bulls? Those two things don't really make a lot of sense when you put them side by side, but when you look at it through an accumulation lens, it does. And so that creates an interesting pathway toward a sort of culmination during the god era that sets a foundation for the heroic age to really take place. And a lot of what Odysseus is seeing here in the underworld um, comes from that earlier epoch. And so that in reality goes back probably to the beginning of humans telling stories to each other. This is a sort of accumulation or culmination of, okay, we have the foundation and general understanding of our gods. Now let's place people representative of us humans in that world. We have the gods explaining the natural world around us. Now let's see how uh, these heroic figures exist within it and represent our values, our trials and tribulations in a way that we can relate to. And I think there's a sort of, when I talked earlier about the genealogy or mentioned the genealogy, it's like you hear a lot, especially in this chapter, of Odysseus recognizing, um, even with someone like Achilles, that he comes from Peleus, and Peleus was born of Zeus. So it's connecting the modern human world to its godly roots. in a way, I think maybe saying that we humans are part of nature, though a small fragment of what has come before and the powers that surround us all. But what I cannot quite grasp and have not been able to find definitive research on this, and probably because um, without surviving texts, it's impossible to do this. But like when Odysseus is referencing Minos, when he's referencing Ariadne earlier in this chapter, uh, or Heracles or Oedipus, like he's acknowledging these myths, but is he inventing them here that later authors and playwrights and storytellers will recontextualize and deepen their stories? Or is he referencing something that is well known by audiences of the time? It's hard to know. And what makes it messier is that this being oral performance, there's probably a million variations and iterations on every single one of these stories. So while someone might know a name in this story, like Ariadne, uh, the details of that story are probably different from village to village or poet to poet. And that's kind of where the chronology is kind of living for me, is the less a like timestamp of the epoch of the gods and Sisyphus and all those people um lived 1,000 years before, 10,000 years before. It's more just an acknowledgement of the succession of there is the god era, and now we are in the heroic age with both Heracles and Achilles down here already. We're right smack in the middle of it. There will be heroes to come. And that's both exciting and a little frustrating for modern audiences like myself who thrive on chronology, and I love knowing what influences what. So not having that information is both irritating and what I think is partly responsible for the obsession of trying to understand it all. Okay, that's all I've got for today. Join me here tomorrow with the final episode of Book 11. Until then, okay, goodbye. Odyssey is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. The show is produced, edited, and hosted by Landon Solano. The original text of The Odyssey, written by Homer. Theme song by Neuroflow. You can support this show and other shows like it by going to patreon.com/gruntworkpod. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.